I stood in my own driveway staring at the locks that had been changed on my front door, my keys useless in my shaking hand, while my daughter spoke to me through the Ring doorbell camera, calmly explaining that I could visit on Sundays if I called ahead first, as if I were a guest and not the woman who owned the house. For months, that's how long it had been, for months of living in a hotel, draining my own retirement savings while she claimed she was renovating my home as a surprise gift. Except there was no gift at all, only theft. And my name is Linda. I'm 72 years old. I've lived in that house for 43 years, raised my children inside those walls, buried my husband from that living room, and my daughter almost took it all from my almost stand. Before I tell you how this nightmare unfolded, I want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city and state in the comments, because it helps me know I'm not alone. And honestly, after what I've been through, community matters more than ever. This story starts 6 months ago on what felt like an ordinary Tuesday morning, when I was sitting on my back porch having coffee and Stephanie pulled into my driveway in her Range Rover. My daughter, who had always been successful, a real estate agent married to Brad who works in finance, living in one of those new developments with granite countertops and open floor plans, and I was proud of her. I trusted her completely, and that was my first mistake, because she called out Mom, practically bouncing up my porch steps, telling me she had the most amazing idea and begging me not to say no before I heard her out. And I smiled, curious, because Stephanie had that infectious energy that could light up a room. And when I asked what it was, she sat across from me, grabbed my hands, and said that she and Brad wanted to renovate my house, completely new kitchen, new bathrooms, refinished floors, everything as a gift to me, because I'd talked for years about updating the place and deserved it after everything I'd done for our family. And I was stunned, because renovations like that cost tens of thousands of dollars, and I told her I couldn't let her do that, but she insisted, saying they wanted to, that they'd already talked to contractors, but that I couldn't be in the house during construction, because it would be a mess and unsafe with all the dust and noise. And she squeezed my hands and suggested I stay somewhere nice for a few weeks, promising they'd cover everything if I just let them do this for me. And my heart swelled, because after my husband Tom passed 3 years ago, I'd felt so alone, in that big house with its 1981 kitchen cabinets and the awful pink tile in the master bathroom, and the thought of a beautiful, updated home where I could host my book club and have my grandchildren visit comfortably felt like a dream. So when I asked how long I'd need to be gone, and she said 4 weeks, maybe 6 at most, assuring me I wouldn't have to worry about anything, I believed her, even though I should have worried about everything. The next week moved quickly with spreadsheets, Pinterest boards, and contractor quotes, gorgeous white kitchens with marble countertops, and magazine-worthy bathroom renovations, all of it looking legitimate, professional, and generous. And she showed me photos of a lovely extended stay hotel with a kitchenette only 20 minutes away, telling me I could check on the progress whenever I wanted. Well, during the day while contractors were working, because of insurance liability and all that tend, that should have been the first red flag. But I was so touched by her generosity and so excited that I ignored the small voice, asking why I couldn't just stay with her and Brad. And when I brought it up, she had an answer ready, explaining their basement renovation had turned their house into chaos and that I'd be miserable there. And it all made sense. Everything she said made sense. Until one evening when she arrived with a folder of paperwork. She called formalities, insurance stuff, permission forms, and, as I read, contractor agreements, liability waivers, and materials lists, I came across a document that made me pause and ask what a quitclaim deed was. And she barely looked up, casually explaining it was temporary, just legal protection, while they invested in renovations, something standard in family situations, promising it would be transferred back when everything was done. And when I set down my pen and said I needed to think, her smile tightened as she reminded me contractors were starting Monday and deposits had been paid, asking if I trusted her, accusing me of acting like she was trying to steal from me while tears filled her eyes. And the guilt hit me like a wave, because here was my daughter trying to do something nice, and I was questioning her, wondering, what kind of mother does that? Here was my daughter offering to spend her own money to give me something beautiful, and I was questioning her motives, and I remember thinking, what kind of mother does that? So I apologized quietly, telling her she was right and that I was just being paranoid. And she responded by gathering the papers and saying I didn't have to sign it and that we could cancel the whole thing, which immediately made me panic. So I said no, I wanted her to do this, that it was just a big change, and she softened, telling me she understood and that was exactly why she didn't want me signing anything I was uncomfortable with, suggesting we just move forward with getting me settled into the hotel and figure out the deed later. And I agreed, even though I didn't sign the quitclaim deed that night, and she never stopped asking afterward. The hotel was nice enough, a clean room with a small kitchenette, a comfortable bed, and a view of the parking lot. And Stephanie had paid for the first month up front. So I settled in with my suitcase of clothes and a box of books while she promised to keep me updated every step of the way, telling me this was going to be amazing and that I'd see. And for the first week she did send photos, cabinets being removed, old flooring torn up, walls being prepped for paint, and everything looked legitimate. So legitimate that I drove by the house twice and saw a construction dumpster in the driveway and a contractor's truck parked outside. But then the photos stopped, and after 5 days of silence I texted her asking for updates, only to get a quick reply saying she was super busy but everything was on schedule. Promise. And that's when I decided to drive by unannounced. And when I pulled up, the dumpster was still there, but something felt off because the contractor's truck was gone. And when I walked up to the front door and tried my key, it didn't work, my heart pounding harder as I tried again and again, with nothing. Realizing the locks had been changed. So I called Stephanie immediately and told her my key didn't work and asked if the contractors had changed the locks, and she casually said yes, for security, explaining that with crews coming and going, they didn't want anyone unauthorized getting in, and promising to get me a new key that week. And when I asked if I could come see the progress that day, she said they were doing chemical treatments and refinishing the floors and it wasn't safe to be inside, suggesting we plan for next week. But next week came and went with no key, no visit, just excuses about delayed permits, electrical issues that needed to be addressed first, and backordered tile. And by week 6 I was paying for my own hotel room because Stephanie said there was a cash flow issue with the contractors and promised to reimburse me, while the renovation that was supposed to take 4 to 6 weeks was now projected at 3 months. And I started to panic as my savings drained away, living out of a suitcase and not having seen the inside of my own home in over a month, until I finally told her firmly on the phone that I needed to come by the house, only for her to repeat that it wasn't safe and to trust her. And I snapped back that I didn't care if it was safe because it was my house, and I wanted to see what was happening. And after a long pause she told me, fine, come by Saturday at 2 and she'd meet me there. But when Saturday came and I pulled into my driveway early at 1:30, determined to see my home, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Because through my living room window, my window, with the curtains I'd hung 20 years ago, I saw Stephanie and Brad, not reviewing renovation plans but sitting on my couch watching my television in what looked like a fully furnished, completely lived-in home. And through the side window I could see my kitchen with new cabinets that were filled with someone else's dishes, and in that moment I realized they had moved into my house. And I sat in my car with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process that my daughter and son-in-law were living in my home, not renovating it but living in it. And then the front door opened and Stephanie walked out with a coffee mug in her hand, completely casual, until she saw my car and her expression shifted instantly from relaxed to annoyed as she walked over to my driver's side window. And when I rolled it down, she told me I was early, and I told her she was living in my house, my voice barely steady, and she told me to calm down and let her explain. And I demanded to know what there was to explain, accusing her of lying to me and moving into my home while I was paying $60 a night to sleep in a hotel. As Brad appeared in the doorway watching us, and Stephanie sighed like I was being unreasonable and said they needed a place to stay temporarily because their basement renovation had been a disaster with water damage and mold issues and they couldn't live there, claiming she knew I wasn't using the house and it seemed silly for it to sit empty while they were in crisis. And when I reminded her it was my house and I was only supposed to be gone for 6 weeks before the renovation hit complications, she brushed it off, saying I was acting like they'd committed some crime and that they were family and taking care of my property. And when I pointed out she'd changed the locks, moved in her furniture, and was living there without my permission, her eyes narrowed as she said she'd been paying the utilities, maintaining the property, and since I hadn't signed the quitclaim deed, she'd been fronting all the renovation costs out of pocket, costs that kept going up. And there it was again, the quitclaim deed, right in front of me. If you sign the deed, she continued, her voice softer now, we can formalize this arrangement. You can move into our guest house. It's lovely, really, and we'll take over the mortgage payments and maintenance here. It's too much house for you anyway. Mom, you've said so yourself. And I told her I'd said it needed updates. Not that I wanted to give it away, but she dismissed that, saying it wasn't giving it away, it was family helping family. And if I was going to be difficult, maybe we needed to have a different conversation. Glancing back at Brad, who was still watching from the doorway, before telling me they'd invested over $40,000 into the property, floors, kitchen, bathrooms, all upgraded on. If I wanted them to move out, I'd need to reimburse them for the improvements, my mouth falling open as I said they'd done this without my permission, only for her to say I'd given permission when I moved out and handed over access to my house, telling me to check my texts because I'd said, do whatever you think is best, and she had it in writing, and she did have it in writing, even though I'd meant design choices and cabinet colors, not taking over my entire property. And when I said I wanted to see inside, she told me no, not until we sorted it out legally, explaining Brad had already spoken to their attorney and that I could either work with them or things would get complicated. Stepping back from my car and saying she'd call me next week and that in the meantime, I should think about what was really best for everyone, before walking back inside my house and closing my door in my face, and I drove back to the hotel in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice, collapsing on the bed when I finally reached my room and trying to think clearly, realizing my daughter had stolen my house, not with a gun or a break-in but with paperwork, manipulation, and my own trust in her. And now she was threatening me with legal action if I didn't cooperate. So I pulled out my phone and read every text message from the past 3 months and saw she was right that I'd said do whatever you think is best when she asked about countertop colors, and that I'd also said I couldn't wait to come home, and that this was so generous, and I trusted her judgment on the renovations, even though nowhere had I said please move into my house and claim it as your own, and I wondered if a court would see it that way, knowing I needed help. Real help. So I called my son Michael in Colorado, who I hadn't told much about the renovation because he and Stephanie had feuded for years, but I was desperate, and when he answered on the second ring and said I sounded upset, I told him everything: the renovation promise, the hotel, the changed locks, discovering them living in my house, the quitclaim deed. She kept pushing the threats about reimbursement till the silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, before he finally said tightly that she was trying to steal my house, and this wasn't a miscommunication but theft, calling her a con artist who happened to share our DNA, and reminding me how, after their father died, she'd convinced me to make her executor of the estate, and how money had gone missing then too, something I'd forgotten, or chosen to forget. Those $15,000 discrepancies she claimed went to funeral expenses and estate fees that I never saw receipts for. The audit Michael had wanted that I'd shut down because I couldn't believe my daughter would steal from her dead father, whispering, "Oh God," as he told me very carefully not to sign anything, not a quitclaim deed, not a rental agreement, not even for a package, and to get a lawyer immediately, someone who specialized in elder abuse and property disputes, because that's what this was, elder abuse. The words hitting me like ice water as I realized I was the victim and my own daughter was the perpetrator. And when he told me there was one more thing I had to do, and that it would be hard, to go to the bank and make sure Stephanie didn't have access to my accounts, my stomach dropped because she was on my checking account after helping me set up online banking last year, and I'd added her as a joint owner for emergencies, and he told me to get to the bank now before she cleared me out. And if you're feeling as shocked as I was in that moment, please hit that subscribe button, because this story gets even more unbelievable, because I was at the bank when it opened Monday morning, and the moment I checked my balance, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. $43,000 gone. My retirement savings down from over $68,000 3 months ago to $25,000, my checking account down to $37 from what should have been about $12,000. And when I told the teller I needed to speak to a manager right now, my voice shaking, I found myself in a small office with generic landscape paintings as a bank manager named Patricia pulled up my account history while I tried not to vomit. "Here," she said, turning the screen toward me. And suddenly the evidence was right there in front of my eyes. These were the withdrawals from the past 90 days. Transfer after transfer. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 3,000, 7,000, all authorized by the joint account holder, Stephanie Chen. And the name hit me so hard I blurted out, "Wait, Chen," because my daughter's married name is Morrison. Brad Morrison, and Patricia zoomed in on the account details and calmly explained that the joint holder was listed as Stephanie Chen, added to my account 14 months ago. While my mind reeled as I remembered, Stephanie had divorced her first husband, David Chen, 6 years ago, and I couldn't understand why she would still be using that name instead of Morrison. Until it hit me all at once that when she helped me set up online banking, she must have used her old married name, a name that wouldn't immediately connect to her if anyone ever looked into the transfers, meaning she'd planned this, maybe not exactly 14 months ago, but she had put the pieces in place long before the renovation scheme ever began. And I told Patricia I needed Stephanie removed from my accounts immediately and wanted to know if I could get any of the money back. But Patricia's face stayed sympathetic and professional as she explained they could remove Stephanie's access right now. But recovering the funds was more complicated because Stephanie was an authorized user on the account. So technically, these weren't fraudulent transactions from the bank's perspective. And I would have to pursue it through legal channels like a police report or civil suit, which I did that afternoon, only to have the officer who took my statement be kind but not encouraging, as he explained that in family disputes like this it's very hard to prove theft when the person had legal access to the accounts, and that my best bet was a civil attorney who could help me go after her for the money and for my property. And that evening Michael's lawyer recommendation came through, a woman named Patricia Vega who specialized in elder financial abuse, whose $300 consultation fee was money I barely had left but paid anyway. And when we met the next morning she told me to start from the beginning, and I told her everything: the renovation promise, the hotel, the changed locks, finding them living in my house, the missing money, the quitclaim deed demands, and she took notes, asked questions, then leaned back and said the good news was that I still owned the house because my name was on the deed and they were trespassing and could be forced out, while the bad news was that it would take time and my daughter would fight dirty, maybe 30 to 60 days if we moved fast, possibly less with an emergency hearing. Those 60 days felt like a lifetime, but I had no choice. And the next morning, Attorney Vega filed an unlawful detainer lawsuit to force them out and a temporary restraining order to stop Stephanie from taking or selling anything else of mine, warning me Stephanie would be served within a day or two and would be angry, and that I was not to answer calls or texts because all communication now went through her, which I agreed to, but underestimated how vicious Stephanie would become when the calls started within 3 hours of being served. 17 calls in one afternoon, followed by texts accusing me of destroying the family over a misunderstanding, claiming Brad and the kids were devastated and crying, which broke my heart because my grandchildren Emma and Jackson were 7 and 9 and innocent. Yet Stephanie knew exactly what would hurt me most. And then the messages turned darker, with threats, insults, claims her lawyer said I'd lose and owe her money, and the line about Dad being ashamed of me made me throw my phone across the hotel room. And by day 3 she changed tactics and began calling family and friends, telling a story where she and Brad had sacrificed everything to care for me, paying for my hotel, funding renovations, managing my finances because I was confused and forgetful. And now I was repaying their kindness by suing them and trying to make them homeless, which led my cousin Janet to call me in tears asking if it was true because Stephanie said I wasn't well. And when I told Janet I wasn't confused and that Stephanie moved into my house without permission and took $40,000 from my account, Janet hesitated and said maybe I had just forgotten. And that was when I realized how good Stephanie really was, because she wasn't just stealing my house and money, she was stealing my credibility and painting me as a senile old woman who couldn't remember her own decisions. And even as my book club stopped returning my calls and church friends started looking at me differently because Stephanie had spread claims of early-stage dementia, I told Attorney Vega firmly that I was not confused and I was not dropping the lawsuit. And Vega confirmed what was happening in blunt terms: alienation, gaslighting, reputation destruction, textbook behavior. She's trying to make you drop the lawsuit. Don't. We're getting a court date and we're going to win this, Vega told me, but winning felt impossibly far away when I was sitting alone in a hotel room with half my family convinced I was losing my mind and my own grandchildren being fed lies about their grandmother. And the court hearing was scheduled for exactly 47 days after we filed. 47 days of living in that hotel. 47 days of spending money I didn't have. 47 days of my daughter living in my house, sleeping in my bedroom, eating at my kitchen table, while Vega prepared me for what was coming, warning that Stephanie would bring documentation, receipts for renovations, proof she paid utilities, text messages from me authorizing work, and that she would paint herself as the devoted daughter, helping her aging mother, while I would be portrayed as confused and ungrateful. So we needed to counter every single claim, and I brought my own evidence: bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, text messages proving I'd repeatedly asked to return home and been denied, emails from before the renovation where I talked about my plans for the house, my house, after updates were complete, photos of the property I'd taken months before this started, time-stamped and geotagged, and Michael flew in from Colorado the day before the hearing, the first time I'd seen him in 8 months, and I broke down crying when he hugged me at the airport and promised we were going to fix this. And the courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. Stephanie arriving with Brad and an attorney who looked like he cost more per hour than I spent on groceries in a month, dressed in a cream-colored dress with a pearl necklace I'd given her when she graduated college, the optics deliberate as she looked like the perfect, concerned daughter. And when our eyes met, she didn't look away but stared at me with cold calculation that made me realize this wasn't my daughter anymore. Maybe she never had been. And Judge Martinez, a woman in her 60s, reviewed the files before calling us to order. Stephanie's attorney going first in painting a picture of a devoted daughter who invested her own money into her mother's home, managed her finances with permission, moved in temporarily due to emergency circumstances, and was now being accused of theft by a mother showing signs of cognitive decline, claiming there was documentation that Mrs. Ashford had become increasingly forgetful, repeating conversations, forgetting appointments, confused about financial arrangements she herself agreed to, and that his client was heartbroken but responsibly seeking legal clarity on a property where she'd invested significant personal funds. Then Vega stood and said this was not family miscommunication but financial exploitation and property theft, targeting a vulnerable senior, that my name was the only name on the deed, that I never gave permission for my daughter to move in, never authorized the withdrawal of $43,000 from my savings, and never agreed to sign over my home via quitclaim deed, despite repeated coercion, presenting bank records, text messages, a clear timeline, showing how Stephanie changed the locks, denied access, and systematically isolated me from my property and community. And Judge Martinez listened neutrally until she asked Stephanie if she had receipts for the alleged renovation costs, her attorney confidently producing a thick folder totaling $42,000, new cabinets, $8,000, flooring, $6,000, bathroom fixtures, $5,000, the list going on until Judge Martinez held one receipt to the light, noting the March 15th date, the different paperweight, the printer font changing midway through the document number, and then pointing out another receipt with a business license number that didn't exist, explaining she recognized the format because her brother owned a tile company, calling it fake. While Vega requested a forensic analysis, and Judge Martinez coldly said it wouldn't be necessary before asking Stephanie directly if she fabricated the receipts, her face going pale as she claimed contractors provided them, only to be asked for names and contact information she didn't have, prompting Judge Martinez to state plainly that the contractors didn't exist, the receipts were fake, and they were created to justify stealing $43,000 from my mother's bank account, shutting down the attorney's interruption by naming it fraud and elder abuse, then turning to me with softened expression to say she was truly sorry I'd been put through this by my own daughter, before turning back to Stephanie and saying, "Here's what's going to happen. You and your husband have 48 hours to vacate Mrs. Ashford's property," Judge Martinez said, ordering that all keys be returned and that nothing belonging to me be removed, damaged, or sold, warning that failure to comply would result in arrest for criminal trespassing. And when Stephanie tried to interrupt with, "Your Honor, we have nowhere to go," the judge cut her off sharply, telling her she should have thought of that before moving into someone else's home without permission, and repeating, firmly, 48 hours, then turning to the bank statements and ordering full restitution of the stolen $43,000 to be paid within 90 days, explaining that if payment wasn't made I would be entitled to place liens on any property she owned, garnish wages, and pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud, at which point Stephanie's face crumbled and she whispered, "Mom, please," and for the first time since entering the courtroom, I spoke directly to her, quietly saying, "Don't, just don't." before Judge Martinez signed the orders, declared us adjourned, and told me she hoped I could return home and find peace because I deserved it. And 2 days later, I stood in my driveway again, this time with locks that worked, opening my door and walking into my house, which looked exactly as I'd left it except for the new kitchen cabinets and refinished floors, the only renovation Stephanie had actually completed before moving herself in, with the rest revealed as lies no new bathroom, no updated fixtures, just enough work to make the story believable while my furniture was still there, though some pieces had been shoved into the garage to make room for theirs, my photos still on the walls, my books still on the shelves but pushed aside for Stephanie's decorative nonsense, and Michael helped me move their belongings to the curb, every box, every piece of furniture, every trace of them, working in silence as I felt something lift with every item removed. Even though attorney fees had cost me another $8,000, the hotel had taken $11,000, and I'd spent nearly $20,000 just to reclaim my own home, but I had it back. And 3 weeks after the court order, Stephanie made one final attempt to reach me, leaving a voicemail in a smaller, almost broken voice admitting she'd messed up and hurt me, reminding me she was still my daughter, explaining that Brad had left her, taken the kids, and filed for custody because of the legal issues, that she'd lost everything and didn't know what she'd been thinking, confessing she thought if she had my house and could prove to Brad they could live somewhere nice, he'd stop talking about divorce, that it got out of control, that she was sorry and needed me. And I listened to the voicemail twice before deleting it, after which Attorney Vega helped me get a restraining order barring Stephanie from coming within 500 feet of my property, and Stephanie began making restitution payments of $300 a month, meaning it would take 12 years to repay what she stole and I'd probably never see all of it. But that no longer mattered, because what mattered was that I was sitting in my own living room in my own house, drinking coffee from my own mug, that I trusted my instincts when something felt wrong even when it meant going against my own daughter, that I didn't sign the quitclaim deed, that Michael visits more often now. My book club meets here every Thursday again with the full group once they learn the truth. My grandchildren send me cards, sometimes with cautious little notes Emma writes in careful handwriting, and I write back telling them I love them and that none of this was their fault, knowing maybe someday they'll understand what really happened and maybe they won't, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. And when people ask if I regret taking Stephanie to court or destroying my relationship with my daughter, my answer is no, because she destroyed it the day she chose to see me as a target instead of her mother, the day she decided my home was worth more to her than my trust. And at 72 years old, I live in a house I almost lost because I loved someone who didn't love me back. Not the way a daughter should love a mother anyway. But I'm still here, and this house is still mine.